So my name is Paul FERRO, and I am an independent institutional consultant. I have 15 years of consulting experience, consulting to a diverse set of firms, foundations and endowments, corporate retirement, as well as nonprofits. And so I'm on an independent adventure, and I care deeply about this issue. And get on my soapbox just for a second, and we'll say that I do believe more than economics that we do have a moral imperative to care for the earth and be good stewards of its resources. And I believe that's why we're all here today. Some may be more skeptical than others, and that's fair. So I think we're in good hands for the next 45, 50 minutes with a distinguished panel of professionals. Do want to apologize. I was informed that Senator Rosa GALVEZ of Quebec is unable to join us via the screen
Has
there.
a busy job.
Yes,
Very
yes,
busy.
yes. So we're going to move forward, and I'll allow the panelists to introduce themselves. So go ahead, Val.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. It's an honor to be here. My name is Valerie Redhorse MOHL. I go by Val. And I'm invited here today, I'm sure, because of my current role as the Deputy Chief Investment Officer of the 5 New York City pension funds under the Comptroller's Office, which looks like it's about to change after last night. But I would say that even maybe more importantly to this conversation is my heritage. I am Cherokee Indian by blood, have worked extensively in our Native American communities in investments. And so we'll be referring a lot to that because we as a community have always cared about the earth and the people in it. And it's not something that's a recent sort of focus. It's something that's sort of generationally and ancestrally ingrained in me. I started my career with Mike Milken at Drexel Burnham Lambert 40 years ago and have been doing investments, investment banking, asset management. Started the first Native American-owned investment bank on Wall Street in '97, and then just continued to work with tribes, spent some time in the nonprofit space, and spent some time in working with family offices. And I teach part-time at Stanford, where I'm on a board. And then now I'm here in New York City and happy to be here.
Great. Sam.
Thanks. Sam SCHRAGER, Head of Climate Analytics for the Americas at ISS STOXX. And we work with investors of all shapes and sizes, including asset owners who are looking to integrate climate into their investment processes, looking at emissions, physical risk, transition risk, net zero. Great to be here and looking forward to meeting some of the other attendees.
Hi, everybody. I'm ALEKSANDRA HOLMLUND. I'm the CEO of Qarlbo Biodiversity. We are a Swedish company, Swedish investment company, owned by the Qarlbo Group, which has been founded by Mr. Connie Johnson, who also happens to be founder and chairman of EQT, one of the world's largest private equity businesses. So at Qarlbo, we manage the private wealth of the Johnson family. At Qarlbo Biodiversity, we intend to make biodiversity investable. And this is the mission that we have, which is our sort of higher goal, which reflects Mr. Johnson's personal beliefs and intentions. And we do so by investing in nature positive forestry. And I will be happy to tell you more about it later today.
Thanks, Alexandra. That was great in terms of the introductions. So let's just, without further ado, let's get started. Our topic is climate, biodiversity, and financial catastrophe. So my first question, and I pose this to each one of you, how much of that title is hyperbole? Are we at a true tipping point in terms of an existential threat to people and to economies? Because at bottom line, this is an issue that's impacting people and financial systems. Give me if you have a stat or something, make me nervous.
Shall I? So yes, there are a lot of alarming numbers around there. The number that comes to my mind immediately is that if we reach the tipping point of ecosystem collapse, that may cost the global economy of a loss of global GDP by 2.3%. That's a huge number.
Okay.
So,
Just adding to that some statistics around the climate crisis. There were a couple state studies that came out last year in Nature. One was in Nature, the other one was in Nature Climate Change, and they come to slightly different conclusions that are still of very large magnitude. One study by a few researchers at ETH Zurich found that climate could impact about 10% of GDP per year, which is a significant value. We're talking in the trillions of dollars. Another study, very similar framework, found that we've already baked in around 19% of GDP loss. Those numbers are significant. It's hard to say if that's hyperbole and how catastrophic that would be. This is, of course, speaking in terms of economic damage.
Sure.
I'm going to go in a little bit different direction with a stat.
Please.
Because we are mostly investors or we're focused on investments. What concerns me and the reason I took this job is right now, women and people of color control less than 2% of our assets in terms of being asset allocators, so heads of funds. And what we know also from data is that women and people of color and low-income communities actually are more affected by climate and actually tend to do more change related to climate. And so part of my role is to really see how not only can we integrate climate data and ESG data into our investments, but how can we shift capital so that we're getting more diversity of thought and diversity of investments in those strategies. And I think the other data point to think about is we're in the middle of the greatest transfer of generational wealth. And a lot of the second gen who will be controlling that wealth do care a lot about climate. And so I'm really focused on how we use our capital and shift our capital to find the solutions and doing it in a way that includes diverse thought and diverse people.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Hello, I'm here.
Oh, Senator
Yes,
Galvez.
hello? Yes,
Thank you so
hello,
much for
hello.
joining us. We're so glad to have you. You want to introduce yourself for a
Thank
minute?
you. Yeah, sure. So my name is ROSA Galvez, and I'm independent senator at the Canadian Parliament. And I have this is my second professional life. Initially, I was environmental engineering, working in science. So I think that the framing of these issues are absolutely no hyperbolic. You know, there are constantly reports, World Economic Forum, and many others saying that the climate risk, nature-related risk are among the top long-term threats to the global economy. In Canada, at present, right now, we are not even started summer yet, and we already exceed the $5 billion in wildfire expenses. So we estimate that by 2030, climate change will have cost Canadians $35 billion. So yes, it's true, there is a lot of danger, but there is a lot of opportunities. And I think that we have to concentrate in the opportunities that present in front of ourselves, depending in each of our situations that we live in our nations.
Well, thank you, Senator Galvez. And I know you're definitely at the forefront of climate-aligned finance. I'd like you to get into that a little bit in terms of, it seems like a lot of the research I was doing is produced by central banks. It's produced by governments, the UN. I know you've been a part of COP 25, 26, and 27, I believe. And so there's a lot of people with good intentions, and there are frameworks, that have been developed and goals.
Yes.
Can you speak to that? And then in terms of, okay, that's all well and good, but then enforcement and implementation and the challenges you're facing in your job as a senator.
Yeah, so Canada is like the perfect example where we have a suite of environmental legislation. You know, we have the Net Zero 2050, we have the Just Transition, we have Environmental Racism Act, we have the UNDRIP, we have impact assessment. We have a suite of legislation, and still Canada remains the only country of the G7 that has not decoupled its economic growth from its greenhouse gas emission. And why is that? Why is that? And we believe more and more that is because the finance sector is not playing the role that it should play in this transition. So right now, our banks, instead of putting $4 in renewable energy and $1 in helping the fossil fuels phase down, is exactly the opposite. So they are investing a lot more in the fossil fuels, which are plagued with all kinds of risk, stranded assets, and these risks are not disclosed. Some people voluntarily disclose some of these risks, but most of the time they don't disclose. And recently, one more example is that the competition commissioner put a provision in a bill and to stop greenwashing. And so we had all these major finance actors, insurance, pension plans, and bankers saying, yes, we align with the net zero 2050 goal of Canada. But when people went inside, the numbers were not there, the actions were not there. And so they quietly start withdrawing from these pledges of net zero 2050. So we have to find other ways of mandating complete disclosure, but also maybe developing the taxonomy. Taxonomy was initiated by the government like 5 years ago, and none of the recommendation has been followed. But there are other jurisdictions where it works. I am right now in Salzburg, in Austria, talking about transition, and we talk about the Green New Deal in Europe, where taxonomy is there and progress is seen.
Yeah, no, and I agree that there is some progress, right? I mean, Europe is well ahead. If someone else wants to comment, maybe Alexandra, if you want to comment about Europe and some of the mandates or disclosure regs that are there. And then
I think the senator mentioned the most important one, the taxonomy and the European Green Deal. That's it. I think it definitely provides means for businesses to enhance green investing that has not been in place previously, and definitely does help.
Any other comments? We can continue to move on. There seems like there's a lot of risk in the system, and I feel like a lot of times the way things are run, there's so much speed, and we're just careening towards something, and I'm not exactly sure what. And it's like, when something happens, then we react, and then sometimes we don't even react after something happens. So we've been in this kind of industrialized situation since like the 1700s, and it's like, how much can we extract? How much can we pollute before we give back and ensure a truly sustainable system or circular system, right? So where are the risks? If I would like to talk about risks in the system. We talk about there's physical risks and from, let's say, damage from a storm or something like that, transition risks, transitioning to a low carbon economy. Is there something we're not thinking of in your work, or if anyone else wants to opine? Mr. GALVEZ, I'll let you.
Yes, yeah, sure. Yes,
yeah.
Yes. There is a technological risk too, because people that continue with the old technology are going to be left behind. And later, when they will finally accept that we are in this energy transition or even ecological transition, they will suffer. There is reputational risk, because imagine the banks. What holds a bank is its reputation. And when we know that these bankers are financing things that are going to become stranded assets, that poses a risk. And this is the risk to all the money that it's put by all the clients. So these banks work with our money. Whether it's $1, whether it's $1 million, it never stays in the coffers. It's invested, and we should know what type of investment. The fact that our pension plans that should be thinking in having to give pensions for workers in 20 years, in 30 years. So to have a very long-term vision, they are now investing a lot more money in fossil fuels, which is the short term. Then they are putting in risk the credibility, the reputation, the litigation. There's going to be litigation. But also is because, the physical models on the climate physics, there is always a new factor coming in, and the causes are compounding, one in the top of the other. So the physical models are not keeping up with everything that is coming in the top and having a synergistic effect. The pace at which the planet is warming is faster. than what initially it was predicted. We already exceed the 1.5 degrees, and now we are battling for, not exceed the 2 or the 2.3, etc. So this is the point. This is the issue: is that risk increase with the time and with the understanding of the other factors that are affecting. And at the end, even the safety and security and the sovereignty. I talk about that in Canada because literally in the north, in the Arctic, we are losing land, territory because of erosion, because there is no more ice to protect the shorelines. So these are real, it's materializing. The risks are not only potential risks, now they are materializing.
Right, that risks are now. And Val, you wanted to comment about.
I want to,
pensions?
build on
Sure.
the pension fund comment because I work for a pension fund. I think we have to also look at financial risk, and I think there's a lot of education. So I used to work for a foundation who was so focused on climate, they divested of all fossil fuels. They invested proactively into clean tech and the energy transition, but they had $1 billion under management. So I felt like, okay, I was doing a good job, but I wasn't making a big difference. I'm sure you all know it's public information. We manage slightly under 300 billion in the city of New York. So I came here knowing that maybe I wouldn't have those same kind of commitments, but can we start to implement that? The title of this panel is Data Driven. And I think data will help us get there. But for those of us who work in pension funds and sovereign wealth funds, the number one consideration is financial return. And if you think of every employee in New York City, I mean, we represent the firemen, the policemen, the teachers, all the employees in the Board of Education. We don't want to hurt their pensions. And so we have to be concerned about growth and return on investment. And I think there is a misnomer, a mischaracterization that anything related to climate or ESG is somehow concessionary. And that is just purely wrong. And what we know now with data is those entities, whether they're portfolio companies or managers that are concerned about ESG and climate, usually perform better and are outperforming. But that data hasn't been fully integrated into all of the pension funds and all of the money managers. There's still a little bit of resistance, but I'm very proud of our office. So the New York City pension funds, 3 of the 5, they're not all quite there, have implemented a requirement that our managers have to have a net zero plan by June 30th. Starting June 30th, so starting Monday. And this is both, someone asked a really good question. This is for both private and public investments. And we will not re-up into those managers that do not have an acceptable net zero plan. So it's a start. It's voluntary at the moment. But when you use capital as a lever, I'm not going to say a threat, it's a lever, right? If you don't do this, we will not re-up. Then I think you're actually getting some results. And I actually believe that we are mitigating our financial return risk when we look at the ESG footprint, the DEI footprint. It's all connected. And so we do have an entire department called ESG integration. We do proxy voting, shareholder activism, and we do profiles on every one of our managers. But we're sort of one of the few that take it that seriously.
Yes.
So I think it's a valid point in terms of what you're talking about in terms of the money, right? If you could force change is tough.
It's not going to happen out of the goodness of our hearts.
No, we have to put together, right? Profits and environmental protection. Alexandra, Sam, you want to comment on that or?
I have one comment. I think in terms of the information that's leading to some of the decision-making that's happening at investors, I think we have a generally good idea over the types of information needed, whether or not you're looking at physical risk, transition risks, net zero, carbon emissions. There's still a lot of information there. If we just isolate physical risk, and I think the main point here is that you have to be comfortable with methodology and ensure that the information is usable for your use case. So if we're looking at physical risk, what hazards are you looking at? Are you looking at tropical cyclones, drought, wildfires, floods? What information do you have about the impact of those hazards? What asset data do you have that can then link up with that physical risk hazard? Other types of modeling information, impact functions. How are you computing those hazard intensities into damages. All
Right.
that information is extremely important, but I think in general, we have a good idea over the framework and the types of elements that we can include in that analysis.
Oh, I think that's excellent follow-up there. Alexandra,
I would like to agree
Okay.
with what you both said.
Yes.
I can just sort of chime into what Val said. And I think that investors, LPs, should use their power more
yes,
to place the money where it should be, so to speak.
Right.
We know that in terms of biodiversity, that we have a huge financing gap to finance all the restoration and conservation globally. That is mostly coming from taxpayers' money. And everybody's asking the financial community to come in and chip in. This is not happening yet
Right.
for various reasons, and maybe we can discuss that, like why.
Sure.
But I think there's a great opportunity, and I also think that it's really important, and we will look at those opportunities, that we're not talking about charity here, that we are talking about profitable investments, and they have to stand on their own 2 feet.
Yes,
Otherwise, it's not going to fly.
right. You have
Yeah.
to make the investment case.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
So Val, let me put a question to you directly. I understand you're Deputy CIO of Responsible Investing for New York City's pension funds. And I understand that you work also, not just climate and ESG, you also work on diversity. And how do you feel like that kind of ties into this conversation? Yeah.
Absolutely. And first of all, we are ignoring the federal government narrative right now that defines DEI as some sort of handout or lowering the bar. When you're in the financial business, you don't do that. You look for your return, you look for your data. And right now, our data is showing we do what we call an MWBE report and an ESG report. And those companies, as I mentioned in my opening, that are led by women or diverse managers and or have very strong ESG and climate policies actually return about 5% more for us. And so when we talk about this, it's not theoretical, it is actual data driven that we should be investing more in diverse managers who typically care about the earth. And so you really can't separate the two. We find that they all kind of get integrated together. And then I would add that when you're a large pension fund like we are, there is so much to be done that can be exciting. Divestment is one thing. So some of our pension funds have decided to divest of fossil fuel investments. I will add that many of the trustees on those that have made that decision are women. And so again, I'm just going back to that diversity of thought is important. But then for all of our pension funds, as we look for return, looking at clean tech and energy transition is a moneymaker. I mean, you should really be thinking intentionality. It's one thing to say, I'm going to divest of the S&P 500 because I don't want to be invested in fossil fuels. I think it's much more exciting to say, I'm looking at innovative, disruptive technology that is cleaning up our earth, that's cleaning the water, that's cleaning the air, and how that will make money going into the future. And I know there's a question coming up that I'd love to talk a little bit more about on critical mineral mining. I'm going to pause there, but I think that's an exciting topic as we think about the future.
Yes, we did prepare a little bit. So the next question is going to be about biodiversity in particular, because I feel like climate does take up a lot of the headlines, and you don't hear as much about biodiversity. There has been UN conferences about it. Alexandra, you're a pioneer really in that space. But I'll start with Val, because I know, Val, you work with tribal nations, given your background, and it's sometimes climate and biodiversity they're competing really, because when you clean up emissions, then you need batteries, or you need to build out your grid, and so you're mining and so forth. How do you think is that a concern, or how would you manage that?
It's a concern, but I think there are solutions. And for me, it was a big education because prior to coming here, I lived in Silicon Valley. Everyone has an electric vehicle. You think that's a good thing. And then you start to think about the battery storage and the need for the critical minerals. And what I learned is that the problem with when they come from China isn't just the existence of critical minerals, it's the processing of the critical minerals. And so both the mining and the processing, often when done offshore, are done in a way that is extractive. They don't care about the land, the earth, or even the community and the labor force. And so what we found, and I've been involved in kind of a think tank, and this is outside my hat as the pension fund DCIO. This is more as a member of the tribal community. In the Milken Institute, we've been talking about critical mineral mining in places where they exist in great quantities, like Alaska, as an example. And I think Canada too. And having our tribal communities who are the stewards of that land make sure that it's done in a way that is not extractive and sort of lead the dialogue about how this happens. And we talked a lot today about nature and biodiversity and the effects upon the species and the soil and the water and the air. And if you can do it in a way that is, that takes that into account, how much more beneficial as we go forward. And I believe we will need critical minerals in massive quantities. If we think of data centers and we think of battery storage, we think of electric vehicles and electrification all around. We are in an urgent situation that is not hyperbole, that we don't have enough, and we certainly don't have enough that is mined in a way that is not extractive.
Right. No, excellent points. It's not a simple issue. There's a lot of interconnectedness. And so, Alexandra, I do want to pose this to you. It seems like that biodiversity has more of a near-term impact than climate. I think climate, you try to bring people along, and it's like, okay, the earth is warming. Is this natural? Is it man-made? And there's this, and the data is there. We could get into that with Sam just in a second. But I want to talk to you about the more intermediate or immediate effects of biodiversity loss, right? Pollinator disruption, soil contamination, things along those lines, water quality. Do you think that's not getting enough attention? And what are you doing in your work to combat it?
Yeah, thanks. Well, it's interesting. Obviously, climate change is a huge problem. But it's not really up until 4 years ago we started to talk about biodiversity very actively. And it's amazing how much we've talked about since 4 years ago. There's a lot of things that happened in the past years.
Right.
At the same time, it's not that we're not aware about the problems with biodiversity destruction. There have been incidents before.
Of course.
I mean, we talk about DDT. Everybody knows about DDT.
Right.
And other chemicals that are poisonous that we already know about, but we stopped using them because we understood how it affects us. We all have a negative impact on biodiversity because we all need to eat food, and that food is grown somewhere.
Sure.
And it's actually the land conversion that is the biggest driving force behind biodiversity loss globally. And it's what is behind that land conversion? Well, it's us humans who need food and materials. Right. And 70% of total land globally has been converted to some kind of production landscape, forestry or ag.
Right.
So we know this. This is there's a well-known fact.
Sure.
And it's also a very well-known fact that most of the working lands are not managed sustainably.
Right. So
and that's still a fact.
That's still a fact.
Yes. And of course there are attempts, and some people are doing a good job, but still, we have rather unsustainable land management practices globally. So back to what we are trying to do at Qarlbo Biodiversity, we're working specifically with timberlands management.
Yes.
So we invest in nature positive timberlands management because we do obviously think that there is a need for a circular economy.
Right.
We do want to produce sustainable materials that are recyclable and that can be grown through a biological process. So we don't need, wood is a perfect example, and wood can be used for even making plastics. So we do think that's important. However, we do also believe that forest management can be done better. So it does not only consist of plantations that all look the same.
Right.
So the word biodiversity, it's self-explanatory.
Sure.
It means it's a lot of different things. So nature needs a lot of different things to thrive.
Yes.
So if you only grow one tree species in one place, that's surely not as sustainable as a multi-story, multi-species forest. However, there is a problem here.
Yeah.
It's a financial problem.
Right.
And I think this is something that I really feel passionate about and trying to explain to people, that oftentimes when we try to do more sustainable forestry practices, and I think this even applies to ag,
Right.
we actually get lower returns because of the higher costs and lower output.
Right.
So we need to create mechanisms that will allow us to get paid for the service that we're doing
Sure.
for creating more biodiversity. And this exists to some extent, but not fully, to compensate the landowners to change their management practices. So this is something that we are addressing in our work, in our investments.
Great. And we'll hopefully have some time at the end to
Yeah.
revisit that, 'cause it's a very fascinating topic, the biodiversity credit. But thank you for, putting that issue out there like that. And I know you are passionate about this and you're very active and a leader in that space. And it seems like there is potential for some kind of non-linear, I feel like that there's a theme here of like something is building up or bubbling. And I mean, no one knows. Sometimes you just don't know what you don't know, where this, could, where things could go wrong perhaps. And there could be a true, go ahead, Alexandra.
Well, a
comment
lot
on
of
that,
things
please.
can go
A
wrong.
lot of things can go wrong.
Yeah. So
Okay. But
yeah.
Yeah, no,
So
but explain,
I
please.
have a number actually, and it's,
Yeah.
again, I'm a forester, so I'm very nerdy regarding trees. That's the only thing I know. But I think it's ETH Zurich that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
They wrote a lot of interesting papers. There is one paper that says that a 10% decline of forest biodiversity actually results in 3 or 4%, I can't remember, decline in forest productivity.
Right.
So that straight
Is it-
down to the bottom
And then
line.
it can back.
It does have an impact, and that's why it matters. We
Excellent.
don't
Thank
need
you
to
for
say more.
quantifying.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, let's turn it over to Sam.
Oh, yeah. Well, I was just thinking about biodiversity loss, and
Yeah.
it does seem that there are changes. You mentioned nonlinearity
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
That changes are happening at such breakneck speed. If anyone has left New York City recently and they've driven around the countryside, they'll notice very few insects on their windshield. At nighttime, if there's a screen door, you'll notice very few moths kind of on the screen door. These changes seem to be very dramatic and also very, very recent. So that to me indicates some potential nonlinearity. Although we've also had some foreshadowing on this. There was this very scary study in a German nature preserve, you're probably familiar with this, about tracking insect biomass loss over decades, seeing dramatic decreases in insect biomass loss in this nature preserve. That is a little scary, but it does seem like some of these, at least the visual impacts, have been accelerating. I want to mention one other thing.
Yeah.
And this is stemming off some of the conversation about conflict minerals, kind of relating that to emissions. So you can look at scope 1 emissions, scope 2 emissions, scope 3 emissions in the value chain. And you can have some trade-offs between, let's say, companies that are decreasing their scope 1 emissions, which you actually do see. You isolate the set of strong reporting companies that have been reporting their scope 1 emissions over the past few years.
Yeah.
And you sum all those emissions up. That number is important because that's being emitted into the atmosphere. You sum all that up and you actually see that emissions for scope 1 have been decreasing by a couple percent per year over the past few years. That's good.
Yes.
At the same time, scope 3 emissions have been increasing at roughly a similar rate.
Right.
So that's kind of an interesting point where direct emissions are decreasing and then supply chain, value chain emissions are increasing at the same time.
Okay, no, thank you for, good.
I want to bring something up that I think is potentially good news, kind of building on what you said about when you do certain mitigation, sometimes that does lower the cash flow margins or the profitability for obvious reasons. And where we sit at the pension funds and as investors in general, you have to make a return. And so that's a scary thing. And yet I think there is a solution. So in our office and in most investment strategies, it's a risk-adjusted return that you are hoping for. And so the higher the risk, the higher return. But if you have a guarantee, then like in our portfolio, we've invested into a lot of affordable housing in New York City, but we have guarantees on the loan portfolios. And so we can take a lower return, but it's risk adjusted. So it fits into our parameters. There are important partnerships, I think, to be had between investors and investment strategies and nonprofits, large foundations and endowments that have what they call PRIs, program-related investments, they can actually offer first loss guarantees or guarantees if it's an impact strategy, which then would allow investors like us to invest in a company or a portfolio that is bringing a lower return or a lower rate of return, but guaranteed, then it's a risk-adjusted return that we can actually handle.
No, thank you. Thank you for that. I want to just loop Senator Galvez back into the conversation.
Yes. Yes, sure. I would like to talk about a little bit on
I have a
the
question. Go ahead, Senator. We had a
is
little
the-
miscommunication. Screen. Go ahead, please.
this shift in the paradigm of the economic system, thinking that we can have an infinite growth in a finite resource planet, it's a little bit illogical. And
Right.
we have talked about climate, global warming and biodiversity loss, but we know that there are other planetary limits that has been exceeded. We are in the presence of ocean acidification. We are in the presence of a high pollution, whether it is in the as pesticides in the soils or as plastic in the floating in the Pacific. But we also have a disequilibrium in the nutrients, in the phosphorus, in the nitrogen in the soils. So we have several concomitant crises that are coming, all of the result of this unsustainable economic model that we are so in love with, overconsumption, and then it's the friction between the developed countries and the developing countries, and who is going to push for this transition, this energy transition and ecological transition. And I agree with what has been said about, for example, there is profits in every dollar that we put in nature-based solution or in biodiversity. There is profits to make. There is profit to make in using of renewable energy, because renewable energy is evolving so fast that the prices are in free fall. And so there is profits to make, and we have then to shift this traditional economy to new models of economy. The co-panelists talk about circular economy, but there is also, for example, in Canada, our population is aging, and we need the care economy. We need the knowledge economy in which we have artificial intelligence, which should help us in solving the problem, but not creating social tensions. But we have also the restoration economy, because we have damaged so much, especially and in particular with the oil mining way of extracting and having all kinds of residues around the mines. We have to restore these places, and also the regenerative economy. So we have to find ways of model of economy that are in better harmony with nature laws, so that we really improve the well-being and the quality of life of citizens, and diminish the tensions that we are creating with the developing countries.
I didn't really, I think it's great comments, and I do think there's a mismatch with, what have you done for me lately? That's what the market, there's no way of getting around this in terms of short-term quarterly earnings, especially with public companies. And then the government, like Senator Galvez, what you're saying, you're thinking of the future and thinking of how is this really a sustainable system. So there is a definite tension. And we can talk about, I understand, really what I want to hear before we go to Q&A is what you're doing currently, because, right, Val, Sam, and Alexandra, and Senator Galvez, you're in the arena. There's critics out there, of course, anytime there's change occurring, and there is this kind of sense of, well, we don't want others dictating, policy and or practice or disclosure. And there's court challenges to things that are coming out of California or New York State, more progressive states. But I want to hear what you're doing day to day in your role This is like climate Avengers, like what, what are the solutions? What are we doing right now? Because the train has left the station. I don't care what administration is here. There are people doing a lot of good work right now. So I want to hear what you're doing currently.
I'll jump in, and I'm going to take off my pension fund hat for a minute and put on I teach at Stanford, very part-time, but being in the Valley where Stanford is and being in that environment, I actually think AI can be very helpful in some of the solutions that we're looking at. And just anecdotally, several years ago, I talked to a founder and I was trying to help him find some venture capital. And it was an AI sorting system for waste, because a lot of waste is used as feedstock for sustainable airline fuel and other renewable energy products. I was pleased to find out that he's now grown. He's got institutional capital. He's on to getting private debt and private equity, and hopefully will go public. But my point is, I know there's some things to be fearful of in AI, but I don't think we should be afraid of it. And we should really be looking at disruptive technology that can fast forward the climate solutions we need. And just coming from Silicon Valley and moving into New York, I think New York is maybe a little afraid of AI. And my message is, don't be afraid of AI. Explore it, invest in it, because I really do think it can help with solutions.
Yeah, that's great to hear about AI. Very interesting. I'd say for myself, on a day-to-day basis, to be frank, what I do is indirect. That doesn't mean it's not valuable, but it's providing data and services to our investor clients. And so we're one cog in that chain, one chain in that link.
What are companies, what are they looking to do with that data? Like, what are they
there
for?
are many different use cases. It can be our clients have set climate targets. They manage a certain amount of money. They have a certain amount of investments.
Okay.
And they're looking to, maybe they have a net zero ambition. They're looking to reduce the emissions associated with their investments over time.
Sure.
There might be other voluntary use cases. There are regulatory use cases.
Sure.
There are use cases for analyzing risks and opportunities related with their investments. So there are many different types of ways that climate data and information get used by our clients. Climate targets is probably an potentially impactful area,
right,
where our investor clients have set emission reduction targets over time. Those will get phased in. They can track their progress on that. But our role is definitely indirect, providing the data, providing the services, so our clients can be better equipped to meet their goals.
Okay, thank you. And Alexandra, you want to talk about the biodiversity credit solution?
Yeah, sure. So at Qarlbo Biodiversity, we do mainly three things. I'm just go very quickly through them.
Sure.
So one, as I mentioned, we invest in nature positive forestry.
Yes.
Second, we have engaged within the biodiversity credit community globally. We're one of the founding members of the Biodiversity Credit Alliance, which has been endorsed by the United Nations.
Right.
And launched at the COP in Montreal some years back.
Right.
We have developed a biodiversity credit methodology for production forest landscapes.
Right.
And have also helped develop a global standard for production landscapes for biodiversity credits.
Right.
We've also invested in a tech tool that helps us monitor, validate, and report on the biodiversity net gains that we are achieving through our enhanced biodiversity friendly management. And this all requires, I would like to say, we are not enough ourselves. We're just a small team,
right,
but this really requires a lot of teamwork and a lot of partnerships.
Yes.
So we really like to build partnerships with like-minded investors,
right,
with businesses that develop different solutions that we can use. So that's what I do on a day-to-day basis, meet a lot of people, and we test a lot of things, see what flies.
You want to talk about the property in, I'm sorry, the property in Louisiana? I think it's fascinating.
Yeah. So we did a pilot biodiversity credit sale. The first biodiversity, it's not a pilot, it's a first commercial biodiversity credit sale in the United States.
Right.
And it's a voluntary biodiversity credit. It's not regulated. So it's on 100% voluntary basis, which is difficult because it's a nice to have. Right. So what we've done is basically we have this property in Louisiana. And we've cleared an area which was planted by slash pine, which is a commercial tree species.
Right.
And we've replanted it with the longleaf pine,
Mm.
which is a very, I would like to say, a threatened species of pine in the
Sure.
United States, which has been on decline for decades. I think only 5% of the initial population of the pine actually exists today. So
Oh, wow.
a lot of longleaf pine needs to be restored across the United States. So we did that, and we were lucky enough to have been able to sell it to a corporate buyer.
Oh, nice.
We are also working on actually something that we will be able to speak about soon, I hope. We're working on ways to monetize on biodiversity values that are connected to the wood that we produce more sustainably,
Mhm.
and hoping to get more paid for that wood resource than other people are able to. So that's the concept that we're
there's-
working on, trying to make it more equally profitable as traditional timberland management.
Right. So there's progress.
Yes.
I know it's nascent and
Small
it's
still, but
small,
we're getting
incremental.
there.
A lot of change is not glamorous,
Yeah.
incremental.
Yeah.
Sometimes it comes in one fell swoop. But I like what you all are doing. It's the work has to be done every day. So I'd like to open this up to Q&A. We have about 10 minutes left, 13 minutes left.
Someone just
Yes.
Oh, hi, Michael Scanlon. I can't get up right now. But number one, John Fullerton and Regenerative Economics Senator. If you have a chance to look up John Fullerton, Regenerative Economics, he's one of these massively major thinkers out there. He's got a new book. It's called An Hour Book, supposed to be read in less than an hour, about regenerative economics and how that works. Marjorie, on the side there, give us some good examples like sustainable timber in the EU, things that we don't see here much, but I'm involved with a number of efforts over there. And I think something like that, or sustainable timber, which if we all know timber is clear cut and it's all dead, everything behind it. But sustainable timber, it's got to be licensed, it's got to be validated, it's got to be verified. There's a lot of good things going on too. Maybe give us a little upbeat.
Well,
Thank you.
Thanks for the question. Well, it's more complicated than that. And I would like to say that forest management is approximately looking the same all over the place. So, and it really depends on what kind of tree species you're growing. You will find clear cuts where I come from Sweden. It's quite common to do clear cuts. People generally don't like them, increasingly so. It's not that very popular, and there is a lot of public discourse against clear cutting. I would like to say that sometimes they are necessary. However, there are other tree species that are not managed through clear cutting, most usually the broadleaf species. So this is where you will find different types of continuous cover forest management, which means that you take a few trees here and there, and then create sort of openings in the forest that let the light in, so you get the natural regeneration. But what we normally do to enhance biodiversity is by incorporating different actions, such as continuous cover forestry is one. A second is actually using fire as a forest management practice. It's actually an excellent fire protection practice as well. And there are a lot of insects that are very dependent on fire cycles. So we like to reintroduce fire, and I think that a lot of experience from previous generations who know how to do it properly. But also another thing that I'd like to mention is active creation of dead wood. Obviously, dead wood is not something you want in a production forest, because a dead wood is a dead tree. You don't get paid for it. But it's a home of lichens, of mushrooms, fungi, insects, and birds eat all of that. So it's a whole ecosystem around a dead tree.
Just to build on that, so in California, I think everyone knows we've had devastating wildfires, and for years, centuries, hundreds and thousands of years, our Native American tribes have had methods to prevent wildfires and to really, preserve forests. And finally, the California government has pulled in some of the indigenous wisdom. I don't know why it took so long, but I do think having indigenous wisdom involved in solutions is absolutely essential, regardless of the country or wherever the situation is. Indigenous wisdom should always be considered.
One question here, it's me again. We talked a little bit about climate adaptation solutions earlier in the day, and I think even in this conversation have started to talk about biodiversity solutions. What I guess I'm curious about, we've been talking about, sustainable timber, fire management practices, solutions that are very much focused on their impact to biodiversity. I imagine that there are solutions that are also incidental in their impact to biodiversity. Right? Like I've heard the joke before that golf courses and cemeteries are the two biggest wastes of land. And I'm just curious how much we're waiting for innovation in golf tech, in cemetery tech, in recreation and other ways in which we use land. How much do things have to happen that are not intentionally addressing the biodiversity crisis that we've turned?
I'll jump in. Just my initial thoughts based on the data that we use. Until you can have impact metrics and impact reports that show some direct correlation to this investment in this company. So if there's a management firm that manages a whole bunch of golf courses, and we've done a study that shows they directly are impacting the species or the water or the air quality, whatever it is, it's very hard for us as investors to simply anecdotally say we're not going to invest in golf courses. So I think what you do is extremely important, but we have to improve our impact metrics. They're so different. It's not just about decarbonization. There's so many more metrics that we need to look at.
I would like to add that, yes, I would like to add that some data is very important. It's coming out. Like, for example, in the city of Medellin, they managed to bring down 2 degrees the temperature during extreme heat domes event because they are start planting trees. So little by little, this data is going to come, and I think that it will improve and it will make decision making easier and with results. Because now I know that with this change of narrative, climate change has been politicized, and even United Nations, is less talking about climate change, it's talking more about extreme heat events. And yes, it's true. Some wildfires are necessary for so many natural processes, but at the point also it's going to influence what my other co-panelist was talking about, which is the emissions, the total emissions. And unfortunately, Canada, is being pointed out as influencing the air quality in several cities around the world because of these wild forest fires.
Thank you, Senator Galvez. Yeah, no, please, let's keep going.
Hi, yeah, Greg Van Oingen. I wanted to just ask a clarifying question on earlier. I don't remember who mentioned it, but there were some quantitative metrics on the cost of the loss of biodiversity, and loss of biodiversity leads to decline in productivity of forest, I believe.
Right.
So if that's the case, why is it then that landowners don't want to change their practices to mitigate this? And I assume this is an issue of kind of diffuse benefits but concentrated cost, and so that landowners on their own just will not undertake those costs unless there is some government or some other body which is stepping in to try to price this externality. Is that correct?
That's a great question. A simple answer to this is that if you look at forestry, there's only one way basically a forest owner can make money on. There are two actually. One, the biggest one is by selling timber. You cut down the tree, You sell it on the market. There's a market price for wood. Nowadays, there are carbon credits as well. But we are, up until now, not able to put the price on biodiversity. We have no market for biodiversity. You do have more market for biodiversity in the US than we have in Europe, actually. But generally speaking, we're not able to price it, and people are not ready to pay for it either. So when we talk about forest productivity, we are very sort of, it's either 1 or 0. You put the trees you're supposed to produce because the market is wanting them. So that's why we grow a very limited number of tree species commercially, that is. So in the US South is the loblolly pine, you've got the redwoods. In the South America, you plant eucalyptus trees. In Europe, we've got a lot of spruce, etc. So these are the global tree species that we grow, and that's what we get paid for. So I think what is needed for this to sort of to take off is I would like to see more cooperation between public and private. I think that would help.
Any other questions? Go ahead.
Think you talk about invasive species. Does that have a role here?
Yeah, of
Certainly, I've
course.
been trying to stamp out lantern moths in my area. It feels very futile.
Well, invasive species are a great problem. I would like to say everywhere in the world, we have them everywhere. And why it is a problem is because they push out what is native in the area. So it can be really literally suffocating. In some places there are government programs and public programs to get rid of them. In other places there are not. So this would be, let's say, one potential action that would be eligible for biodiversity credit, actually, to get rid of all invasive species.
Please.
Val, you mentioned earlier the decisions that you make when you're deciding to reinvest with managers based on climate targets or other things. And I think, of course, about certain managers who recently faced pressure in red states for maybe ideology or approaches that would be seen as similar on the other side. And I guess I'd like to believe that there's distinctions in that we have science and data and everything that you all have discussed today here. But I'm curious if you could elaborate more on how you respond to those arguments, and maybe relatedly, if it is just a matter of impact and data beyond other rhetoric or arguments or convincing sort of beliefs. Is there any sort of biggest area of metric that you wish you could leverage today that you don't see currently in the market? And I guess, Sam, maybe you'd be equally or similarly qualified for that latter part.
This is the last question. Thank you, Jack.
Very good question. And you actually bring up a point that I wanted to make. And that is, we get a lot of questions right now on the current administration, what the narrative is. And I want to remind everyone that at pension funds and as Native American investors, we are long-term investors. We look forward. We have a saying in Indian country at 7 generations. So we know that anything we do today impacts up to 7 generations of our children and their children. And as pension fund investors, we're always looking long-term. There's no day trading. There's no short-term. So this administration, well, we have 3 more years, and we really don't worry too much about short-term impacts because we're looking long-term. And so when we implemented our ESG policy, it was based on data that actually companies and managers that focus on ESG, climate, and diversity return more in terms of the portfolio. So we are first and foremost financial investors, but the data shows, and it's empirical data, that you're actually making more money when there's good governance and attention to climate. I think to the last part of your question where we'd like to see more data, kind of going back to what I said on the impact metrics, whether it's positive impact or negative impacts, I feel like right now we're looking mostly at decarbonization, which is important, but there's so many other related metrics, whether it's around water usage and species and, different things in terms of, and at lunch we talked about dependencies. Are companies depending on water too much? And, are they affecting the community usage? And community impact is something that I'd like to see more data about. But you get to the point where you just have all this data, you have to make sure you're using it, which I'm proud of our office. We are starting to use it in our decision making, but still not enough for me. But great question.
Dan, you want to take us out here?
No, well put. Nothing to add on that topic. It's definitely very tricky. political fragmentation, different regulatory and reporting regimes, piercing an information bubble or an echo chamber. I mean, those are definitely very, very big issues, but I'm not sure that I have much to add to that.
Okay. Well, thank you all for your attention and your questions. Hope you got something out of it. Thank you.
Thank you.